I think my story is unique, and you'll be surprised by how it turns out. My name is Jake, I'm 34, and until recently I thought I had a perfect life with my wife Sarah. We've been married for 7 years, have 2 beautiful kids, and a comfortable home in the suburbs. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but looking back, I guess there were some signs I missed or just chose to ignore. Sarah and I met in college, and it was one of those whirlwind romances that you think only exist in movies. We got married right after graduation and started our life together. She's always been the more outgoing one, working as a real estate agent while I work in IT. Her job required a lot of networking and late hours, but I never doubted her. I trusted her completely. Maybe I was too trusting. We hired a babysitter, Alex, a couple of years ago when our youngest was born. Alex is 22, a college student, and seemed like the perfect fit for our family. He's great with the kids, always polite, and just an all-around good guy, or so I thought. Sarah insisted on hiring him because she met him through a client, and he came highly recommended. I didn't think twice about it. Things started to feel off a few months ago. Sarah became more distant, always on her phone, and her late nights became more frequent. I chalked it up to the stress of her job, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There were nights when she'd come home late, smelling like she'd been drinking, which was unusual for her. Our sex life also took a hit. She always had an excuse, too tired, not in the mood, or the kids were keeping her busy. I tried to be understanding, but it was hard not to feel rejected. The breaking point came last Friday. I usually work until 6 p.m., but that day I managed to finish a big project early and decided to come home and surprise Sarah and the kids. I thought maybe we could have a family night, order some pizza, and watch a movie. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Alex's car parked out front. It wasn't unusual for him to be there, but something felt off. The house was too quiet when I walked in. I made my way through the house, calling out for Sarah and the kids, but there was no answer. As I approached the living room, I heard muffled voices and laughter. The closer I got, the clearer it became that it was Sarah and Alex. I peered through the living room window and saw them on the couch, way too close for comfort. My heart stopped when I saw them kiss. It wasn't just a peck. It was passionate, and it broke me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, the mother of my children, was cheating on me with our babysitter. I wanted to burst in and confront them, but I was frozen in place, overwhelmed with shock and anger. I took out my phone and recorded a bit of what I saw, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering how long it had been going on and what I'd done to deserve this. Sarah came to bed late, as usual, and I pretended to be asleep. I needed time to figure out what to do next. Should I confront her? Should I leave? My mind was racing with a million questions, but one thing was clear. I needed to know the whole truth. So here I am, sharing my story with you all, hoping for some advice and maybe a bit of support. After that night, I decided to keep quiet about what I'd seen. It took everything in me to act normal, but I needed more information before I could confront Sarah. I had no idea how long this had been going on, and I wanted to make sure I had all the evidence I needed. Plus, a part of me was curious about how far she'd go with her lies and deception. The next morning, I pretended everything was fine. I got up, made breakfast for the kids, and kissed Sarah on the cheek like I always did. She smiled at me, that same smile I used to love, and it took all my willpower not to let my emotions show. I had to stay calm and collected. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to Sarah's behavior. I noticed she was on her phone a lot more, always texting or checking messages. When I asked her about it, she just brushed it off, saying it was work-related. I knew better, but I played along. I started checking her phone whenever I had the chance, but she was smart. She'd delete all her messages and calls with Alex. I decided to get a bit more tech-savvy and installed a spy app on her phone. It was surprisingly easy, and within a day I had access to all her texts, call logs, and even her location. I felt a pain of guilt doing it, but I needed to know the truth. Sure enough, there were plenty of messages between her and Alex, all of them confirming my worst fears. They'd been seeing each other for months, meeting up whenever they had the chance, even in our own home when I wasn't around. Reading those messages was like pouring salt on an open wound. They talked about how much they enjoyed being together, how thrilling it was to sneak around, and even made fun of me for being so clueless. Sarah was a completely different person in those texts, someone I didn't recognize. Instead of confronting her right away, I started thinking about how I could turn the situation around. I wanted revenge, but more than that, I wanted to make sure she understood the gravity of her betrayal. I wanted her to feel the same pain and humiliation she had inflicted on me. One night while Sarah was out with friends, I did some digging and found out that Alex had a bit of a checkered past. He had been involved in some minor legal trouble in the past. Nothing serious, but enough to raise some eyebrows. I figured if I could gather enough dirt on him, I could hit him where it hurt the most. I started collecting all the evidence I could find. I saved all the messages and call logs, took screenshots, and even recorded a few of their phone conversations. I was building a case, and it was growing stronger every day. I also reached out to a friend of mine who worked in law enforcement just to get some advice on how to handle things without getting myself into trouble. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got, but I also felt a strange sense of empowerment. I wasn't going to be the victim here. I was going to take control of the situation and make sure both Sarah and Alex paid for what they did. For now, I kept my cool around Sarah, pretending everything was fine. I knew the time for confrontation would come soon, but I wanted it to be on my terms. I wanted to catch them off guard, just like they had done to me. It was a week after my initial discovery, and I had gathered enough evidence to take action, but I still hadn't decided exactly how I wanted to play it out. I spent countless nights lying awake, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge and justice. Sarah continued her deceitful behavior, oblivious to the fact that I knew everything. One evening, Sarah mentioned she had to work late. I knew it was another excuse to meet Alex. I casually suggested I take the kids to my parents' house for the weekend. She seemed relieved and agreed without hesitation. I packed up the kids and headed out, but instead of going to my parents', I drove around the neighborhood until I saw Alex's car pull up in front of our house. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. I knew this was the perfect opportunity to put my plan into motion. With Sarah out of the house more frequently, I took the chance to install a few hidden cameras around the living room and bedroom. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but desperate times call for desperate measures. The footage would be indisputable evidence of her betrayal. That night, I kept an eye on the camera feeds through my phone. It was like watching a horror movie in slow motion. Seeing them together, touching, laughing, and eventually moving to our bedroom was almost more than I could bear. I recorded everything, making sure I had multiple copies saved in different locations. The next morning I reviewed the footage, my hands trembling with rage. Sarah came home early, cheerful and completely unaware of what I had on her. It took all my self-control not to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed to play the long game to ensure she faced the full consequences. I continued to gather evidence over the next few days, recording every encounter they had. The more I watched, the more resolved I became. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy the life she built on lies. The following week, Sarah announced she had a business trip and would be gone for a couple of days. Perfect. I kissed her goodbye, wishing her a safe trip, and the moment she left, I got to work. I called in sick at work, telling them I had a family emergency, which wasn't far from the truth. I spent the day making copies of all the recordings, printing out the incriminating messages, and organizing everything into a neat little package. When Sarah returned, I continued to act normally, which was increasingly difficult. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who had shattered my heart, but I had to keep up the charade a little longer. Finally, the day came when I was ready to confront her. I waited until the kids were at school, ensuring they wouldn't be around to witness the fallout. I set up the laptop on the dining room table, queued up the video, and waited for Sarah to come home. She walked in, smiling as she set her purse down. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" "Sit down, Sarah," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She looked puzzled, but did as I asked. I hit play on the video, and her expression changed from confusion to horror as she watched herself and Alex on the screen. "What is this?" she stammered, her face draining of color. "This," I said, gesturing to the laptop, "is the end of our marriage." She started to cry, trying to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "Jake, I can explain." No, I interrupted, standing up and pacing the room. You don't get to explain. I've seen enough. I've heard enough. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and making a fool out of me in my own home. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. I trusted you, Sarah. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me, she sobbed, trying to find the right words, but there were none that could undo the damage. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't good enough, I said, my voice breaking. I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You need to pack your things and leave. I can't look at you right now. Sarah's cries grew louder, but I didn't waver. Think about the kids, Jake. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it. You should have thought about the kids before you decided to cheat, I said coldly. You've destroyed this family, and I won't let you continue to hurt us. Pack your things and go. Now, with that, I left the room, needing to get away from her. As I walked out of the house, I felt a mix of pain and relief. This was just the beginning of a long, painful journey, but at least now I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. My focus turned to Alex. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. He had inserted himself into my family and violated my trust. He needed to face the consequences of his actions. First, I did a little digging into Alex's life. He was a college student with a clean record aside from some minor legal troubles. He lived off campus in a small apartment. Knowing his routine and background helped me plan my next move. I decided to hit him where it would hurt the most, his reputation and future. I compiled all the evidence I had of their affair, the videos, the text messages, and the incriminating photos. I saved everything on multiple USB drives, making sure I had backup copies stored safely. One evening, I drove to Alex's apartment. My hands shook with anger as I knocked on his door. When he answered, the smug look on his face vanished the moment he saw me. "Jake, what are you doing here?" he stammered, clearly nervous. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the apartment. He didn't dare stop me. I walked into his living room and sat down, glaring at him. "Sit." He sat down across from me, his face pale. "Look, man, I'm sorry I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I scoffed. "Didn't mean for it to happen. You've been screwing my wife for months. Don't insult me with your apologies." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to listen and you're going to do exactly as I say. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone in your life knows what kind of person you are." I pulled out one of the USB drives and tossed it onto the table. And that drive is everything. Videos, text, pictures. I've got copies stored in multiple places. If you try anything, I'll release it all to your college, your professors, your family, and every potential employer I can find. Alex's eyes widened in fear as he picked up the USB drive, realizing the gravity of the situation. "What do you want from me?" "First," I said, leaning forward, "you're going to quit your job as our babysitter, effective immediately. You're going to stay away from my family and never contact Sarah again. Understood?" He nodded vigorously. "Yes, I understand." "Good. Second, you're going to write a letter of apology to my children. They may not understand everything now, but one day they will. You owe them that much." Alex swallowed hard and nodded again. "I'll do it, I promise." "Third," I continued, "you're going to inform your college about what you've done. I've worked and need to step back from your responsibilities. If you don't, I'll make sure they find out anyway." His face turned even paler, but he didn't argue. He knew he had no other choice. "I'll tell them." I stood up, towering over him. "Remember, Alex, I've got copies of everything. If I hear that you've tried to contact Sarah or caused any trouble, I'll destroy you. Do you understand?" He nodded, trembling. "I understand. I won't do anything, I swear." I left his apartment feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds Sarah and Alex had inflicted, but it was a start. I had taken control of the situation and made sure Alex would face the consequences of his actions. The next day, I received an email from Alex. It was a scanned copy of the letter he had written to my children, filled with apologies and regret. I didn't know if my kids would ever read it, but it was something. He also informed me that he had resigned from his job and contacted his college, admitting to his misconduct. With my revenge on Alex executed and my anger slightly tempered, it was time to face the inevitable divorcing Sarah. I knew this would be a long, grueling process, but it was necessary for my healing and the well-being of our children. I had already consulted with a divorce lawyer and gathered all the evidence of Sarah's infidelity to support my case. The morning I served Sarah the divorce papers, I felt a mix of emotions. There was anger, of course, but also a profound sadness. Despite everything, she had been my partner for many years, and it was hard to let go of all the memories we had shared. But the betrayal had shattered our marriage beyond repair, and there was no going back. I chose to serve her the papers at home when the kids were at school, ensuring they wouldn't witness the confrontation. Sarah was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, when I walked in with the documents in hand. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." She looked up, her eyes wary. "What is it, Jake?" I placed the papers on the table. "These are divorce papers. I'm filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity." Her face paled, and she reached for the papers with trembling hands. "Jake, please, can't we talk about this? We can work through it." I shook my head. "No, Sarah. There's no working through this. You betrayed me and you betrayed our family. This is the only way forward." Tears welled up in her eyes as she read through the documents. "But the kids? What about the kids?" "We'll figure out a custody arrangement that's best for them," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "They deserve stability in a loving environment, and right now that's not something we can provide together." Sarah sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I never meant for it to go this far." I took a deep breath, feeling a pang of sympathy despite everything. Sorry doesn't change what happened. We need to do what's right for the kids and ourselves. Over the next few weeks, our lawyers worked out the details of the divorce. We agreed to joint custody of the kids, with them spending weekdays with Sarah and weekends with me. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided. It was painful, but it was the fairest solution. One afternoon, as I was packing up my things, my daughter Emily walked into the room. She was only 7, but she had a keen sense of awareness. "Daddy, why are you packing?" she asked, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. I knelt down to her level and took her small hands in mine. "Emily, sweetheart, Mommy and I are going to live in different houses from now on, but you'll still see both of us, and we both love you very much." Her eyes filled with tears, and she hugged me tightly. "But why, Daddy? Why can't you and Mommy stay together?" I struggled to find the right words. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are too big to fix. But none of this is your fault, okay? We're still a family, just in a different way." As I held her, my heart broke all over again. The impact of Sarah's betrayal reached far beyond just the two of us. It affected our innocent children who had no part in this mess. It fueled my determination to create a stable, loving environment for them, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The day Sarah and I signed the final divorce papers was surreal. We sat in a sterile conference room, our lawyers by our sides, and methodically went through the documents. Each signature felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. When it was over, Sarah looked at me with red-rimed eyes. "Jake, I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope one day you can find peace." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. There was no more room for anger or blame, only a hollow acceptance of what had transpired. I left the conference room feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter of my life with Sarah was officially closed, and it was time to look to the future. I had my kids to focus on, my career, and the daunting task of rebuilding my life from the ground up. As I drove away, I allowed myself to shed a few tears, not for Sarah, but for the life we had once dreamed of, now forever lost. But I also felt a glimmer of hope. I had survived the worst, and with time, I knew I would heal. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. One step at a time, I would move forward, stronger and wiser for the trials I had endured. With the divorce finalized, I thought the worst was behind me. Little did I know Sarah wasn't done with her schemes. She was furious about the divorce and the way I exposed her affair. Her anger fueled a vendetta against me, and she was determined to make my life as miserable as possible. A few weeks after the divorce, strange things started happening. I received a call from my boss informing me that someone had anonymously accused me of misconduct at work. The accusations were baseless, but they triggered an internal investigation. It was a stressful and humiliating experience, but fortunately my colleagues and superiors knew me well enough to see through the lies. Next, Sarah tried to turn our children against me. She would tell them lies about me, painting me as the villain who destroyed our family. Emily and Jason, my 4-year-old son, would come to me with questions that no child should have to ask. "Daddy, did you really make Mommy cry because you don't love her anymore?" Emily asked one evening, her innocent eyes filled with confusion and hurt. I hugged her tightly, my heart aching. "Emily, sweetheart, I love you and Jason more than anything in the world. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are too big to fix, but that doesn't mean I don't love you or your mom. It's just something that happened between us." Despite my reassurances, the damage was done. The kids were caught in the crossfire, and it broke my heart to see them struggle with the situation. Sarah also tried to make my life difficult financially. She contested the divorce settlement, claiming she deserved more than what was agreed upon. She dragged me back to court, but thankfully the judge saw through her tactics and upheld the original settlement. It was a small victory, but it came at the cost of more stress and legal fees. The final straw came when she called Child Protective Services, CPS, on me, alleging that I was an unfit father. The accusations were horrifying and completely false, but they prompted an investigation. CPS visited my home, interviewed me and the kids, and even spoke with my neighbors. It was a nightmare. I couldn't believe Sarah would stoop so low, but I should have known better. She was desperate and vindictive. The investigation dragged on for weeks, casting a dark shadow over my life. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down with my lawyer, Laura, who would become a trusted ally throughout this ordeal. "Laura, how do I make this stop?" I asked, my voice filled with frustration and exhaustion. Laura sighed, her expression sympathetic. "Jake, we need to build a solid case against Sarah's false accusations and harassment. Document everything. Every lie, every false report, every attempt she makes to manipulate the situation. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be." I nodded, determined to fight back. I can't let her keep doing this. It's not just affecting me, it's hurting the kids. Over the next few weeks, I meticulously documented everything. I kept a journal of every interaction with Sarah, every instance of her trying to turn the kids against me, and every false report she made. I also installed security cameras around my house to capture any attempt she might make to escalate her harassment. One day, Emily came home from a visit with Sarah and handed me a note. "Mommy said to give this to you." I opened the note, my anger boiling as I read Sarah's venomous words. She accused me of everything under the sun, threatening to take full custody of the kids and ruin my life. It was the final piece of evidence I needed. With my lawyer's help, I filed for a restraining order against Sarah. We presented all the evidence of her harassment, the false reports, and the manipulation of our children. The judge took one look at the mountain of evidence and granted the restraining order, limiting Sarah's contact with me and the kids to supervised visits. It was a hard-fought victory, but it brought a sense of relief. Sarah's attempts to sabotage my life were finally being curtailed, and I could start focusing on rebuilding. In the aftermath, I had a long talk with Emily and Jason, explaining things in terms they could understand. I reassured them that both their parents loved them, but that sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions to keep everyone safe and happy. Slowly but surely, things began to improve. The kids adjusted to the new normal, and I focused on being the best father I could be. I found solace in my work and started seeing a therapist to help process everything I had been through. One evening, as I was tucking Emily into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, are things going to be okay now?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart, things are going to be okay. We're going to be just fine." As I turned off the light and closed her bedroom door, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew we would face it together, stronger than before. That's when I thought things were finally settling down. Life threw another curveball my way. It happened on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. I was at work, focused on a project, when I received a call from the principal of Emily's school. My heart sank as I answered, fearing the worst. "Mr. Miller, this is Principal Thompson. We need you to come to the school immediately." "There's been an incident involving Emily." Panic surged through me. "Is she okay? What happened?" "She's physically unharmed, but it's urgent that we discuss this in person. Please come as soon as you can." I rushed to the school, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, I was led to the principal's office where Emily sat, her eyes red from crying. Next to her was a stern-looking woman I didn't recognize. "Mr. Miller, this is Miss Daniels from Child Protective Services," Principal Thompson said. "We've called her in because Emily reported something very troubling today." I knelt down in front of Emily, trying to stay calm. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, I didn't mean to make trouble. I just told them what Mommy said." "What did Mommy say?" I asked gently, my heart breaking for her. Emily hesitated, then whispered, "Mommy said that if you don't let her see us more, she'll tell everyone that you hurt us." The room spun as her words sank in. Sarah was threatening our daughter, using her as a pawn to manipulate me. I felt a surge of anger, but forced myself to stay composed for Emily's sake. Principal Thompson and Miss Daniels exchanged a grim look. "Mr. Miller, based on Emily's statement, we need to take this very seriously," Miss Daniels said. "We're going to launch a full investigation." I nodded, feeling helpless and furious. "I understand. Please do whatever you need to ensure my children are safe." Over the next few days, the investigation unfolded. The PS interviewed Sarah, who of course denied everything, painting herself as the victim. Emily's words, however, were compelling evidence. She was young, but clear about what her mother had said. During this tumultuous time, I kept a close eye on the kids, making sure they felt safe and loved. The strain of the situation was palpable, but I knew I had to stay strong for them. Then, just as things seemed to be spiraling out of control, an unexpected ally emerged: Sarah's sister, Jenna. We had always been cordial, but never particularly close. Out of the blue, she reached out to me. "Jake, can we talk?" she asked over the phone, her voice tense. "Of course, Jenna. What's going on? It's about Sarah. I've been worried about her behavior lately, and I think you need to know some things." We met at a local cafe, and Jenna didn't mince words. She had noticed Sarah's erratic behavior and her growing obsession with getting back at me. Jenna had also found messages on Sarah's phone, messages that suggested she was willing to go to extreme lengths to win custody of the kids, including fabricating evidence and manipulating Emily. "I can't stand by and watch her destroy you and use the kids like this," Jenna said, her eyes filled with concern. "I want to help. I'll testify if I have to." Her words were a lifeline. With Jenna's testimony and the mounting evidence from the investigation, Sarah's credibility crumbled. The court granted me full custody of the kids, with Sarah's visitation rights severely limited and supervised. Sarah was furious, but there was little she could do. Her actions had finally caught up with her. It was a bittersweet victory. While I was relieved to have my children safe and with me, it was heartbreaking to see the person I once loved reduced to such desperation and deceit. Life slowly began to return to a new normal. Emily and Jason thrived under the stable environment I worked hard to provide. Jenna stayed in touch, becoming a valuable part of our support system. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Emily looked up at me with a smile. "Daddy, I'm glad we're all together. You're the best daddy in the world." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged her. "Thank you, sweetheart. I love you both so much." Months passed, and life began to settle into a new, steady rhythm. The kids were adjusting well, and I was beginning to find a new sense of normalcy. I had even started dating again, cautiously optimistic about the future. But just when I thought the worst was behind me, life threw one last curveball my way. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and I decided to clean out the garage. It was something I'd been putting off for months, and I figured it was about time to get things organized. As I sifted through old boxes and dusty shelves, I came across an old shoebox tucked away in the corner. I was curious. I opened it up and found a stack of letters and photos. The first few letters were innocent enough, old love notes between Sarah and me from our early days. But as I dug deeper, I found a series of letters addressed to Sarah, dated from around the time our marriage started to fall apart. They were from someone named Mark. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the letters. Mark's words were filled with affection and passion, describing secret meetings and plans for a future together. He talked about how he couldn't wait for Sarah to leave me so they could start their new life. One letter in particular stood out. It was dated just a few weeks before I discovered Sarah's affair with Alex. Mark wrote about a trip they were planning, a romantic getaway to celebrate their new beginning. My heart pounded as I realized Sarah had been seeing Mark long before she got involved with Alex. As I read through the letters, it became clear that Sarah had been living a double life for years. The affair with Alex was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been deceiving me and our entire family, planning to leave us for another man while pretending everything was fine. Feeling a mix of anger and betrayal all over again, I continued to dig through the shoebox. At the bottom, I found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a diamond ring, clearly an engagement ring meant for Sarah. The reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Sarah had been planning to leave me and marry Mark. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. The lies, the deceit, it was all too much. I had thought the worst was behind me, but this revelation reopened old wounds. I knew I had to confront Sarah about this, even if it meant dredging up the past. Later that afternoon, I called Sarah and asked her to come over, saying we needed to talk about something important. When she arrived, she looked nervous, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "Jake, what's going on?" she asked, standing in the living room, her eyes darting around. I walked over to the kitchen table and laid out the letters in the ring. "I found these in the garage today. Care to explain?" Her face went pale as she saw the items. She sat down slowly, her hands shaking. "Jake, I don't know what to say. How about the truth for once?" I demanded, my voice steady but cold. "You've been lying to me for years, Sarah, not just with Alex, but with this guy, Mark. You were planning to leave me to start a new life with him. Were you ever going to tell me?" Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "Yes, I was seeing Mark. It started a few years ago. I was unhappy and I felt trapped, but things didn't work out with him. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. I had already ruined everything." "You ruined our family, Sarah," I said, my voice breaking. "You made me feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't good enough. All the while you were planning your escape." "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I know I can't undo the past, but please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you." "It's too late for apologies," I replied, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "I've moved on and I'm building a new life for myself and the kids. You need to live with the consequences of your actions." Sarah nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I understand. I just hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." "I don't know if I can," I said honestly, "but I know one thing. I won't let your betrayal define me. I'm going to keep moving forward for myself and for our kids." As Sarah left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The past was painful, but it was finally behind me. I had uncovered the full extent of Sarah's deceit, and it had given me the closure I needed to truly move on.